very much. So, hi everybody, and really good to come after the previous presentation. I think it was a good choice to swap the two. So yeah, I'm Francesca Bria. I work in the city of Barcelona, and I'm in charge of the technology and digital policy of the city. And I will present just a big effort, like one big project that we are running as coordinator in Barcelona. And really just to put it on the map, because it's a project that started in January. So we have a lot of open questions and a framework to put out there for discussion. And we are working on solutions also. So it's more to have a conversation about what works and what we should be building in this space. Let me just say that because of the previous presentation, can you hear me well? Yeah? Okay. That I really think, this topic is a big topic, and I don't want to just reduce it to how do we release the data, what kind of technologies we use, even not just what kind of licensing. I think this is all like an important part of what we have to tackle, but without forgetting really that we are talking about a big issue of the future economy, which has to do with trade, which has to do with the economic model, which has to do with the big powers, how the big companies are starting to dominate our social life. And it's not going to be easy to get the data sovereignty, to democratize innovation, and to really get people, to get the power to the people in the digital economy. It's not an easy thing, so I don't want to be reductionist in the way we look at the problem. So this is why Decode is a project which is funded by the European Commission. There are 2 cities involved, so hopefully we're also gonna put some our own resources to make it grow and make it work. And this is a project that was funded really within a portfolio, which I think it's a very small, too small effort from the European Commission. They have been invested 60 million euros in the last 5 years to fund it's called collective intelligence platform, and really to fund alternative approaches to the digital economy. So instead of just giving money to big telcos or to the incumbents, they are trying to explore what we can fund differently, distributed architecture, encryption as a human right, coming up with approaches that are bottom up for people to build on top of the technology and create social value. Unfortunately, this is a small effort, I think, so we need all of you to actually, I think from this kind of conferences has to come a movement that can lobby and pressure more to allocate more public resources and more funding in medical alternatives, because, the big companies that we face, they invest 10 to 20 billion dollars per year on building these big infrastructures. It is not a small effort. So anyways, Decode wants to provide tools that put people in control of whether they want to keep their personal information private or share it as a common, share it for the common good. We have 14 partners involved, and the project is going to last 3 years. And our aim really is to preserve the digital sovereignty of European citizens. I think there is one topic that we don't discuss enough, which is the question that Europe has lost sovereignty in the digital age. Many of the platforms that we are discussing, that they are capturing, let's say they have a predatory platform monopoly model, they are US-based, and this also will give us a lot of issues, even when you're trying to implement advanced regulations, such as the data protection regulation, because in effect you have to enforce it on big corporations that have little to lose, even if we go with antitrust cases as the one we're seeing against Google, where, yes, it is not a good thing for Google, but also it doesn't really destroy their business model. So, the one thing that we are advocating here is that Europe should have its own model, that it's not based on surveillance capitalism, but that it's something that it's more fair and democratic, and should also think about not just the data in itself and how we make it a common good, or how we make it public, or how we keep it private, but the entire infrastructure around it, starting from the hardware, because now we're seeing mass surveillance is more and more about backdoors in the hardware at the hardware level, and thinking about the software level, and thinking about all the regulation, even starting from the public sector, what we can do when we spend citizen money in order to basically have a more ethical approach, to invest in open source software, to invest in open hardware, and to make sure that even when we have third parties provider that develop with public money, that they can that we can put clauses in the public procurement process so to allow this to happen in an ethical way. This is a big deal, and if we do it only at city level, clearly it won't change much, or it is not enough. But if we do it at city level and the state level, and then the European Commission come with us, then it's going to make a difference. So these are all the partners that work on the DECode project. I was saying there are two cities, the city of Barcelona and the city of Amsterdam, that are involved and seriously about wanting to replicate this model and scale it at the city level. But we also have technology companies like ThoughtWorks and Thinkful, which are developing, they have a long history of developing distributed infrastructure and open source solutions. Arduino and Dyn, which are working a lot on the hardware level to provide open specification and work more on secure hardware solutions. And then we have legal expertise, like the Nexa Center for Internet Society, working a lot on new models for digital commons. Eurocat, which is basically they have big expertise on data as a university. The Privacy and Identity Lab, which they work a lot on cryptography, and the UCL, which is working on distributed ledgers and cryptography. So basically, it's really and actually CNRS and UOC, which have an economic expertise. So as you were saying before, we really bring in the economic side, the legal side, the technology side, and then cities which have very strong communities underpinning this project that can bring both the community level but also the public sector level. So decode really wants to experiment this data commons model, which was very well described before, so I don't need to go into the definition again, versus the model of data extractivism. So here there is I just wanted to summarize what is the current paradigm and what is the paradigm where we want to go to. So in the current model, in the current, let's say, economic model, what Shoshana Zuboff defines as surveillance capitalism, actually I think you should read her work because it's very much to the point. Data is a fictitious commodity that can be sold and traded in markets, while in decode we want to have data as a common resource infrastructure where we can be able to build on top of it for having social services, public services, or new services that can also provide value for everybody. While data and monetization is opaque in the moment, in particular, I think one of the problems that we will have is also the algorithms. The question of opening up the algorithm, transparency of the algorithms, how algorithms, basically artificial intelligence, deep learning, machine learning, which is built on top of the data, what's happening at that level. And the problem with Uber, for instance, and Airbnb from a city perspective, you maybe read on the newspaper, like in Barcelona, we're having a pretty confrontational approach with some of these companies, just because what they do really impact on the policies that we want to implement in the city, for instance, affordable houses in the case of Airbnb. And we are saying we cannot regulate black boxes. So if you don't let us see what is inside your algorithms that determine price, that determines the marketplace, how are we going to regulate these companies? So algorithmic transparency, I think it's another big thing. Then, if there is regulation but there is no possible enforcement, what are we going to do? And of course, in the model that we have now, we produce the data and they own it, and basically data sharing is privatized. So how do we can get in a point where we have more transparency and privacy-friendly regulation, where we have data that is shared, are common to rules that are enforceable? So the common enforceable governance, I think it's something that, and you can get it when the basically licensing model or the regulation, it's encoded in the architecture, so that this kind of privacy and security by design, how do we actually make that possible with an appropriate legal regime? And at the end, we want to get to a point where we have new political, economic, and legal regime that recognize social and communal rights to data. And that's why I'm happy, actually, that data is not just, that these are not just individual rights, because we can all make the most out of data in a collective manner, because the important thing is to share this data and to make it available. So it is relevant, this project, for the sharing economy. As we said, we need to build alternatives to the current predatory platforms, maybe more towards the platform cooperatives, or even like distributed architecture, or some form of collective platforms on top of which we can build new services. It is relevant in the Internet of Things, because we're going to have these 50 billion, they say, objects that are going to talk to each other in our home, and like everywhere, connecting our wearables, our home, our city, our car. Like everything is going to talk to each other, but to whom do they talk to, and on the basis of what rules, and how we can have data entitlements for the Internet of Things. And this is a big question. It is also relevant for collective intelligence or democratic participation purposes. So if we can have, we can detect issues that we can solve together, but we cannot decide in a democratic way if basically data is a monopoly for the few. So collecting intelligence really is lost, because the data just belongs to few companies. How then we can regain control of other data? And the point is, again, governments, and I'm not also against this state-driven approach. The state has to do their part, hopefully not implementing the kind of laws that we're implementing now with the excuse of anti-terrorism. No, I think that, we have, as technologists, as activists, we have to be very clear to say that if we look at the facts, we lost the war on privacy. The thing is, mass surveillance is cheaper, every government does it, it's easier to do it, and basically we have to regain this kind of real democratic control, even in the space of cybersecurity. What it means really to gain data sovereignty in this situation and enabling the data commons, and the governments have to be the first one which are saying this data doesn't belong to the government, it belongs to the citizen. So recognizing this first point, I think it would be really a step forward, because even in the best possible solutions that I see now going around, is still a state-centric view. So that's why it's so important to put forward the question of the commons, to say, first of all, a lot of data is co-produced and belongs to the citizen. It doesn't belong to the state. So we need an extra dimension, which is this commonly owned data, because it's not publicly owned. There is some data that may be publicly owned, but a lot of the data is owned by the citizens. So this is, sorry about this picture, you won't understand anything. Anyway, it's the decode architecture, which is actually pretty complex, but we are releasing next month a white paper on the decode architecture, so decodeproject.eu, where you're going to see all the principles and the architecture of the project, and we'll be very happy to discuss it then, and also with the technical team of the project. Anyway, the decode has like three big parts. One is the decode hub, which is the distributed computing platform with open specification at the hardware level. And then it has the Decode OS, which is a Linux-based, a GNU Linux open operating system, on top of which a distributed ledger architecture will run with smart contracts on top of it for the data entitlement, so that people can have a granular way to decide what data they want to donate and on the basis of what rules. And this is going to run on this operating system. So this is actually the Decode OS. It's already been released, so if any of you is interested to look at it, it's on GitHub. And it's an operating system for the smart rules, what we call smart rules, and what is like other people call smart contracts applications. And then we're doing a lot of research on neutral distributed ledgers, and this is because there is a lot of work which is also now very targeted to use like specific applications when it comes to distributed ledgers or to blockchains, and we think Decode is going to be neutral about that, so not like leading you in any of the branded, let's say, blockchains, but really we are testing all of it to be agnostic respect to what distributed ledger the architecture is going to use. So the summarizing of the main goal of the decode architecture is to allow everyone, participants, to manage access to their private data by granting and revoking access to parts of the data, to the attributes, allow operators to write smart contracts, to sign them and get authorization to run them on decode. So basically decode also want to be for third parties application, to allow smart contracts to access private data based on entitlement and matching attributes. So you need to disclose as little as possible about yourself in order to be able to use the decode tools. And allow everyone to record entitlement on a distributed ledger whose integrity is resilient and verifiable. And that's why we're also looking in certificate transparency solutions. So the decode as an underpinning architecture want to lead to claim a new social pact on data, and we have lots of challenges. I have 5 minutes and I want to talk a little bit about the use case, so you can then take the slides. I mean, we have technical challenges about, the open standards, the transparency, the distributed data storage. We have socio-economic and political challenges because we need new incentives, we need business models, we need legal and economic models and incentives about sharing data to create political awareness and get into more non-predatory economic models. I think this is actually one of the biggest problems that we have, that is not going to be easy to tackle if we don't have scale, because the network effect is real in the digital monopoly economy. And then we need mass adoption. So we need to work with use cases that are compelling, where people feel they get something out of it and they want to use these kind of architectures. So that's why we are involved with cities. We're running pilots in Barcelona and Amsterdam. We already done a lot of inceptions, so we're following an agile methodology with lean workshops and co-creations with users. For us, it's super important to start from motivating communities to get people involved so that people understand that it's not just a technical exercise. And we have done already inceptions both in Amsterdam and Barcelona. And the type of use cases that we're going to be working on, and we're already starting on that, is in Barcelona we have data-driven participatory democracy. So decode is going to integrate with Decide in Barcelona, which is our participatory democracy platform. We have 30,000 users involved at the moment, which are citizens. We're running 7 participatory processes in parallel. And basically, this is for signing petition, online voting, just the ones online, so it's more prioritization of proposals, not the real voting, but we don't want to get into there. And basically, to get participatory budgeting mechanisms, where people can be identified, but not to the authorities where they don't want to, but they can be accountable for any democratic systems. On top of Barcelona Decide, we're building something that we call Barcelona Now, as like, because we have all this Google Now and all these AI-driven solutions from big companies, while cities have a lot of valuable data that can be used and that can be shared with their citizens. And so we are building a personalized data commons dashboard for citizens to visualize what is interesting for them, to participate in things that they're interested in, getting notified for things that they can activate themselves in a neighborhood level, and find other people that have similar interests, but with ensuring privacy, so in their profile without having to disclose everything about themselves. We have another pilot in Barcelona, which is about Internet of Things sensing. We are putting forward a new concept, which is data community rights in the Internet of Things, and we're working with the Making Sense and Smart Citizen community. We have a very strong community in Barcelona of people that are putting a sensor, like in their home or in the street, to measure the quality of air or to measure pollution in specific location, or even the noise level in the street. And this is because they want to improve their environment and they want to improve their but they want to flag problems to the city hall. And we're integrating their sensor with our sensor platform. It's called Sentillo. Actually, in Barcelona, we have a big open source sensor platform. At the beginning, when I wasn't there, people from the administration were like to these people, no, you cannot do this kind of things. They censored them. When I got there and I saw what they were doing, I was like, wow, this is citizen science, it's bottom up, it's great. And I opened up the city infrastructure to include their sensor because I thought it was valuable for the city. So also this shows like how you can change your approach if you are in a city to actually include this kind of experiments. And basically now the neighbors understand that when you put an Arduino in your home and you want to measure just a specific thing, but you release a lot of data about your house, about where the location of your street. If there is noise, then you can have a problem with insurance, or you can have a problem with like putting your house in the market because it's less valuable. Well, a lot of things we are exploring, and there is a lot of personal attributes. So now people are looking at how we can share it in a way that we can share it with the people that we trust, and we can build a community of trust around this data. In Amsterdam, we have two very interesting projects. Yeah, I have to close. One is about a localized social network, where we basically are building a peer-to-peer trust system, which is transparent and auditable. So this has over 20,000 users. It's very used in Amsterdam at the moment. It is basically a neighborhood social network. And then we are engaging with Airbnb, and this is a project that we're very interested also in Barcelona, which is basically a cooperative and fair hospitality platform. And this, on this project, I mean, it is really too early to see what comes out, but definitely more cities are getting together to think what are alternatives to the Uber and the Airbnbs, because we have to create our own platforms, which hopefully are more like cooperatives in a sense where citizens have a stake in those platforms, but that are alternatives for running public services in a smart way, right? And this is one of the projects that if cities federate, maybe something can come out that is interesting at scale. So the kind of implementation, and this is my last slide really, that we are doing in Barcelona is to integrate decode into bigger. So this is our data framework, where you can see that we have, our, I mean, it's an entire framework where we're working on creating an interoperable data lake at the city of Barcelona with common ontologies, getting rid of the silos of all the agencies that we have, and working on this kind of stacks like the CTOS platform that we have, the open standards for the sensor platform, and then adding the decode in Barcelona, of course, which is the participatory democratic platform, and then adding this layer of the personal data into it. And I think this was like a very important in the previous presentation, where cities now only work with city open data, mainly. There is also private data, which is how cities more and more in contracts, for instance, in public procurements, can put rules that allow them to get back the data as a common, or in particular standards with ethics and privacy by design, to put those clauses when we do procurement, and then start working on big companies more and more to try and get them to open up the data. And then the personal data part, to gain trust in citizens that if they donate data to the city to improve their cities, it can be with cryptography, attribute-based encryption, cryptography as a human right, and then distributed architecture so that they can own it and the community can own it. So fine, this is our roadmap, and if you want to contact us. Thank you.
Take a few questions. So any questions from the audience? This one.
Hi, very interesting. I would like to know in particular about the data licenses where you can specify the use that is going to be made of your data, how you're going to enforce it. I mean, of course, data can be, in the moment that is accessed, then can be used, and you are not aware of that use, unless you're using some specific technical measures. And if your answer is the blockchain, aren't there problems with the use of blockchain with relation to data protection, for example, the exercise of the right to be forgotten, or objecting to processing of personal data in the future?
Yeah, so the type of licensing has to be different for different purpose. So that's why the Decode project was really into the granularity of access control, which basically means depending on the type of data. For instance, like now we have a lot of data, which doesn't really, I mean, it's open data, so you don't really need a license, but you can control who accesses the data. And you control who accesses the data maybe for the purpose of knowing, you know, what kind of use they do of the data. If they do a lot of use of the data, you can enter into a sharing agreements. We do that with big companies already. And when it comes to personal data, and then why we have a legal bundle rights, like we are working with lawyers now to start understanding. I mean, actually the solution there is not really the blockchain, it's most attribute-based encryption, and we are actually, that's the decode technical work, which is to see how attribute-based encryption can be linked with the blockchain, just because we know that distributed ledgers don't solve anything, any problem related to privacy. But that's the technology part. And then on the legal part, actually there is a very big debate right now. You know, there are some lawyers interpreting GDPR saying personal data cannot be a common. It cannot be because it's based on individual, you know, it's based on like an individual fundamental right, so you cannot touch any licensing. And we are actually looking at what can be this kind of, like the Creative Commons for content that can be applied to the data when it's shared as a common with personal attributes. And this is exactly what we're working on. But that I mean, I insist on the granularity of that because it's really going to be, it's almost like a privacies, right? It's going to be multiple privacies. It's almost not more fluid as a concept than just one privacy. And that's why I think on the legal side we have a lot of work to do. And I insist that actually the lawyers have to work in relation with the economist on one side and the technical skilled people on the other side, because it really changed their mindset also when they think about this licensing and rules and how to apply them. And the economic side is always forgotten. And I think it's one of the big problems, because you know the reason why we don't have this privacy by design and this kind of this distributed architectures or even encryption built in the infrastructure is because the incentive is a different one. The incentive is advertising and surveillance.
Thank you. So I'll take from the screen IO system the two questions which are actually part of the one greater question. So are the citizens in Barcelona really aware of personal data challenges and data awareness actions, and what has been the response from citizens?
Yeah, well, this is a very good question. No, I think in general not aware. Like in general, people are not aware of this issue. And also the thing is that I think we have been framing it too technically. You know, the reason why people are not aware of these issues is because if you go, yes, okay, here there are lots of people which are already literate, we have technical skills, we're really into the topic. But if you go to a general citizen, you say, oh, do you care about data sovereignty? They say, no, I care about my political sovereignty. Well, this happens in particular in Catalonia. People are very strong on this issue. But if you explain them the relationship with personal data and insurance, the relationship with personal data and dynamic pricing that they have to, you know, pay now when they go online, and the difference it makes. If you relate Airbnb and the impact it has on their housing problems, which has been a big leverage for us, and you explain how a different fair model of a different platform could be controlled by the citizens in a way that it doesn't really not put up the price of rent in this way, it doesn't discriminate minorities. You know, we have to basically link the question of data much more to the daily problem of citizens. And I think we have been failing to do that. That's why it seems that people don't care, but this is just because they are not looking at the broader implications of data and how it affects their life. So the response is we have very passionate communities, and that's great. For instance, the IoT sensing communities is great. The participatory democracy community is really, really engaged. And so we are starting now from the engaged communities to scale it up. And I think already, I mean, I'm the CTO, and I try to, you know, bring this discussion, this thinking in everything we do. The mayor really supports this, the first deputy mayor also. So we are trying from our role to put this more into the political discussions.
Thank you. I feel there's lots more to discuss here, but we have to really move on to the next presentation.
Thank you.